Okay, so here we are with our sketch for our xylophone that we are building here. We have made an envelope, we have made an oscillator, and in the last video we talked about arrays, how to refer to different values in an array via their index number, and then we made an array of MIDI notes, which we are using with the MIDI to freq function inside of our oscillator.freq method, and then how we could refer to each note specifically by using its index. Now, what we're going to do in this video is we're going to actually take a slight sidestep to cover a different concept that we're going to bring back so that we can access all these notes in our array depending on what key we press without having to just go in and change it. Okay, but this is a pretty higher level concept that we're going to cover, and this concept is going to apply to a few things in our xylophone of how we can make a bunch of different bars or rectangles or shapes without having to write the code for every individual rectangle, how we can change the fill of each shape, how we can have a different key for each shape. So you can kind of see here in the finished code I have a couple of different arrays here. All right. And so how we can access the values in those arrays without having to necessarily write everything out. Okay, so the concept that we are going to cover right now is something called a for loop. All right, so a for loop, well, I'll hold off on that diagram for just a minute. Okay, so a for loop, we've talked about draw being a loop and something that just is constantly updating and going around and just rerunning your code over and over and over again and doing things over and over. All right, so in computer programming in general, loops are very efficient ways of getting a lot of things done at once in a short period of time without having to kind of do it the long way. So what I'm going to show you here is sort of the basic layout of a for loop, and we'll use it to just make some rectangles, which ultimately will become the bars in our xylophone here. Okay, so the way a for loop works, it kind of is like a conditional statement in the way we write it out in the syntax. Okay, so in a conditional statement we would write if, open close parentheses, open close curly brackets. Okay, so for a for loop we'll start out with for instead of if. Okay, then we're going to do open close parentheses, open close curly brackets. Okay, so that at least should feel a little bit familiar. All right, now the thing about a for loop is inside of a for loop there are a few different things that are like conditionals, but it's going to update itself, and a condition that's going to be met will not always be true until it gets to the end of the loop. Okay, so the first thing I need to do in my for loop is create like a counter, something that's going to keep track of how many times a loop has run, because for loops don't go over and over and never stop. They go for a certain amount of time until they meet a condition and then they stop. So inside I'm going to first make a variable. I'm going to do let I. You can call the variable whatever you want. I is kind of the most common variable people use when making for loops, so we're going to be consistent with that. Right? We're just going to start out I equals 0. So we have this counter, we're calling it I. Okay, now I'm going to use a semicolon and then make the next part. This is the condition that we want to be met in our for loop, and that is going to have to do with our counter. So basically, if our counter is less than 4. Okay, so this is basically during the time that our counter is less than 4, it's going to execute the code that we have. All right, and then let's go. So then we have what happens if we don't meet this condition yet. As long, or if I is less than 4, what is going to happen? All right, so in this case, we're just going to add 1 to I. So we're going to do I++, which is shorthand for adding 1 to this variable. Okay, and then inside these parentheses is something that is going to happen with the code here. Okay, so I'm going to do like a rectangle. Let's just say it's going to happen at 50, 50, 100, 100. Okay, now I'm going to run it. Okay, and there we see a rectangle. Okay, now it just looks like a rectangle, but let me break down exactly how this is going to work. Okay, so here's our for loop. All right, this is sort of a flow chart to let you understand. So for let I equal 0, I is less than 4, I++. So the code is make the square. All right, so here's how it works. each time we go through the loop, we ask, is I less than 4? So if I is less than 4, there's no if, but it's just kind of checking. If I is less than 4, for the time that I is less than 4, do something. Okay, so is I less than 4? Well, I is 0 right now, so yes. So if it's yes, I'm going to run the code inside the curly brackets, which is make this square. Then it's going to update. It's going to add 1 to I. Okay, so I was 0, it runs once, so now I is equal to 1. Is I less than 1? Or is 1 less than 4? Is 1 less than 4 because we updated I? If the answer is yes, we're going to do it again. So we're going to run that same code. We're going to make another square. Then we're going to update I. I was 1, we're adding it, so now I is 2. So if I is less than 4, well, I is equal to 2. 2 is less than 4, so we're going to run the code again. Make another square. Then we're going to come up, update it again. So 2 plus 1 is 3. So I is now equal to 3. Is I less than 4? Well, 3 is less than 4, so yes. So we're going to go one more time. Okay, so make the square again. Update, 3 plus 1 is 4. So is I less than 4? Well, 4 is not less than 4. 4 is equal to 4, so the answer is now no. So in that case, we are going to exit the loop. Okay, so basically we set our counter, we set the sort of the cutoff point for that counter, and it will just update and update until this is no longer true. All right, so let's go back here and look at this code. So now you're thinking, okay, we only have one square here, which is true. But if you'll notice, it just said make this square at that same point over and over. So I have 4 squares here, they're just all on top of each other. So let me show you something that we're going to do now. So what we're going to do is do rectangle 50 plus, and then I'm going to do I times 50. Okay, so remember, I is changing each time through the loop. So the first time I is 0, second time I is 1, third time I is 2, and then I is 3. So now if I run it, you see I suddenly get this overlapping, okay? And I think to make this work, I actually have to make these squares a little smaller. So I'm gonna make them all 50 by 50. And now you see I have 1, 2, 3, 4 squares. Why? Because I said, is I equal to 0? Yes, it is. So make a rectangle at 50 plus I times 50, so 50 times 0 is 0. So that's this rectangle, okay? Then it's going to update, so I is then equal to 1, okay? And then make a rectangle at 50 plus I times 50. If I is 1, that would be 50 plus 50. Runs again, I is equal to 2, it updates, so then 50 plus I times 50, I is now equal to 2, so it's going to be at 100, so 150, and then eventually I is equal to 3, okay, and it continues. Now just to show you, if I were to just change this number to 8 now, it will make 8, and we've run out of room here on the canvas, but I assure you it's there, okay? So basically the counter I can change, and it's just going to constantly update this and put it in a different place. All right, so that is a very exciting concept that we can now use to do quite a few things inside of our xylophone here. All right, so I'm going to move to the next video instead of making this really long and show you where we can put for loops in all these different places.